Hello everyone, today I'd like to talk about classical music. Now let me give my definition of classical music, at least for this video. When I talk about classical music, one, I'm talking about Western classical music. And the second, I'm kind of talking about more of the style, the genre, the art form itself. Classical music also has a time period connotation attached to it. So, when we think of classical music, we think of Beethoven, Mozart, that era of music. But in this case, I'm just talking about the style. I don't really care about the period. It can start from, Mozart, Beethoven, that whole era, all the way till the 21st century. As long as the music is in that kind of style. And when I mean style, when you think of like going to a symphony orchestra and watching a concert, and you have a conductor, and that that style of music is what I consider classical music. Now I know there's a contemporary classical music, and it's used for music for today, but they usually have a connotation, not just the period, but it's a different subset of classical music, different style of classical music, subgenres of classical music, I guess you would call it. But to me, contemporary would just specify for me for a period, but classical music to me is the same. Whether it's a different style of classical music, it's classical music. So that's how I'm gonna define classical music for this video. Now, classical music for me as a little kid never got into, and I think it's one of those music genres, music styles that either your parents or someone you knew close would be into to introduce you into it, or the other way would be your parents or someone would force you to take music lessons as a kid, like piano lessons, and there you'd probably be exposed to classical music. You'd probably be playing some type of classical music during your music lessons, I would assume. So it was never accessible publicly in a sense, like on the radio. I don't recall hearing any classical music. Now I'm not gonna say there wasn't. I just didn't notice it. I know there might be local radio stations or the small like college stations that are able to broadcast on, like, the lower frequencies, like the 80s, those very kind of obscure radio stations, and they may play classical music. But again, as a little kid, I don't recall. But if I did hear it, I'm gonna admit I'm gonna just change the dial right off the bat if I heard classical music. But anyway, so it wasn't accessible as, pop, that kind of stuff is always accessible. You hear it everywhere. Jazz, you hear everywhere. There's like two jazz stations, if I recall, the smooth jazz, and there's another one that played jazz and blues and so forth. So even blues was more accessible, at least for me, than classical music. Also, classical music, besides not knowing anyone and not being able to hear it through the radio, um, the only other way you would probably get to know, classical music would probably be through, like, if you were into it, you would go to like the symphony orchestra. And in my case, it would be the CSO, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. And that's kind of, I don't know. It's if you don't know it, you wouldn't do it. I mean, you wouldn't go, and it's just that simple. Even though if you try to learn it, something like going to the CSO or something, it's kind of I don't know. It's a little. As a kid, for me, it just never happened. So, but anyway, there were two opportunities for me to get into classical music. The first one was movies, television commercials, TV shows, or something that would play classical music. So I would maybe recognize like a theme song or some music in a movie or in a TV commercial, maybe like a short 20-second segment of it, and I recognize, it's classical music. However, most likely I wouldn't know who was the composer and whatnot. So that's the first way I kind of got exposed into classical music. Now, before I talk about the second way, um, my classical music education really was through much later in my adult life. I started to pick up classical music CDs, and usually that would be through like the used record or CD places, and they would they would have to be selling cheap, like $1 or something like that, and then that would, I'm like, hey, it might be good. I always go with the names I recognize, like Beethoven, Mozart, and usually those are the ones you would only see at the stores. But that's how I got into it. I actually just kind of blindly select something here and there. I don't know what the symphonies were popular, what piano pieces were popular, who the actual players, the ones playing the instruments. I didn't know anything. I just kind of went by Beethoven or Mozart. And then picking some of those CDs up, I kind of learned that I actually, two things. I prefer first recordings from the major record labels, and the ones I could think of at the top of my head are Deutsche Grammophon, DG, RCA, and EMI, Angel. Those are the three that always, like, when I see it, I know usually they have the recordings I like. I think they get the better orchestras or conductors. I don't know, or at least the more famous ones. And second, I actually prefer, the more I got into classical music, I prefer the symphony rather than the kind of like the string quartets or operas. I'm okay with. It depends. I just pick them just for the sake of picking them. But that's kind of my thing. Now, here's the thing I have with classical is I can't discern like different recordings of them. So like one of my favorite classical pieces is the Four Seasons, and I think I have about 20 different versions of that from different orchestras, different conductors, and so forth. And I'm going to be honest, I can't tell what the difference is between any of them. I mean, there might be slight things I can tell, but like when you go online and you read like people's reviews of recordings of the orchestra of the classical music, and people would always say, "Oh, I love this interpretation better. The mood on this is better," and so forth. When I listen to it, I can't tell a thing. I can't tell what the difference is. It's like kind of like learning a foreign language. It's much easier if you learn it when you're a little kid, instead of as an adult. When you listen to stuff, it's harder sometimes as an adult to pick up. As a kid, you pick it up instantly. So for me, it's like that because I really got into classical music much later on. But anyway, so for classical music, and I've been trying to figure out why, but the only composers, and I'm talking just composers. I'm not talking about the people who actually play. There's a lot of them, but it's always your the standards, right? You got the triple Bs, Beethoven, Brahms, Bach, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, so forth. So, and then you may have like the early 20th century stuff, maybe like Copland. That's I hear Wagner, popular stuff like that, but I've never heard, even through like just listening what I can see album wise, and through just everyday listening to music, even classical music, I can't think of anyone who's like popular or anyone mentions any of the newer classical music composers. And I'm talking about basically mid 20th century on. I don't know anyone, to be upfront with you. And I know you got to be really into classical music to be in the know, right? So you would follow classical music up to this day. You would know who the new or the composers are, their albums are. But for me, even for trying without really searching, I just don't see it. Now, I do know a few. In the top of my head, like Philip Glass, Jennifer Higdon, and John Adams, I think, and Reich. I forgot his first name, but those are the artists I think are in their current classical composers, living classical composers, and I think Philip Glass is the one I know most because of maybe he done some theme songs or something that I might have picked up or something like that. But otherwise, outside of that, I don't know and just never heard of them. And I did some research before this, and there are quite a bit of quite a few composers. I'd say at least like 20 that Google listed for current what they call contemporary classical music composers. And again, never heard of them. I don't even know what they do, things like that. So I'm trying to think besides being in the know, if you're just a casual classical music person, um, like how would you know these things? Even the symphony orchestras, like CSO at least, when they advertise, it's always like, hey, this is a new season. We got Beethoven, blah blah blah, Symphony 5 coming up. We got Tchaikovsky coming up. You know, the traditional, the ones that you know, right? The names. You may not know the actual pieces, but you know Beethoven, you know Mozart. It seems like they're always playing that. They're not playing anything like contemporary, right? Now, there might be some licensing issues and things like that too, or maybe it's not popular. It could be a combination of things. Popular in a sense, if they did try to play it, who would show up to watch, you know, something like that. So, but anyway, it just seems like you will have to wait like 100 years or something until these names become a little more standard, you know, like Beethoven and so forth. Even they may never be either. I mean, I don't know. I mean, have you heard of Britten? Britten. I got his double album. It's very famous. But people like casual listeners, casual or you know, people not into classical or they just know the basics would only know the standards, the Beethoven and so forth. Now, that got me thinking, why is that? And how to make that more popular. Now, if people say Philip Glass's work is great, Jennifer Higdon's work is great, and so forth, what is that? I mean, first of all, the name is not that popular, and for people, if I mentioned their names, they wouldn't know. First of all. Second of all, I couldn't tell you what type of works they did that is popular or were popular. I can't tell you anything. But if there are real classical music people that say, "Hey, this work is good. This work is good. This is like the new Beethoven or something like that," I haven't heard of it. I don't think anyone has either. Now, how would you promote that or make that more into the realm of like casual listeners like myself would hear it? Besides having to like Google search and directly trying to figure that out, there's got to be a better way to do this. And going back to earlier when I said that there are there's two ways I got exposed to classical as a little kid. One was the movies, TV commercials. Second one was through an infomercial. And that infomercial was, I think it was an infomercial, but it was one of those commercials that all of a sudden advertised like this series. I don't know why. Maybe it was advertising something else and they had this in the background too. But I did recall hearing this type of music play. Okay, so if you don't know this, or if you do, it doesn't matter. It's Hooked on Classics, okay? This album came out in the early 80s. Wow, 1981, this one. So I heard this on TV. I think it was an infomercial. It may have been one of those like Russell Simmons or something exercise. I don't know, something like that. But this was not this particular song, but this music, this type of music was playing, and I'm pretty sure it was in the Hooked on Classics series. Now, the reason why I brought this up is, as a little kid, when I heard that, I was like, "Damn, this is actually pretty good." I mean, it's there's some of the melodies, the classical songs I'm familiar with, but with that beat, and it's more, this one in this case is more of a disco beat underneath. It was actually pretty interesting. So I got thinking to myself, hey, talking about these new contemporary classical music composers, how to promote their music, I was thinking, find someone who's good at, or do something similar to the Hooked on Classics, where someone has to know how to basically take, let's say, a Philip Glass's piece that there's, a section of it that is, you would consider popular or very good to use, and put it on a beat kind of similar to this, but not the, this one's more disco-y. Have it more modernized, more like a hip-hop beat, and play that on top of that, and maybe make an album kind of similar to this. Doesn't have to be, this one's all like melodies. They have like, they take like maybe a minute, 2 minutes, and then they'll just keep going on. Not melodies. What they call these? Basically, they just take like a minute or so, and then they just continue on with a different song, but it's on the same beat. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, if you're creating a new album like this with the new classical music composers material, play more of that, like maybe 3-4 minute versions of their music on top of a hip hop beat, and have it so that they're separate songs, and have it so that the beats are slightly different. Because this, I think this is just the same beat for a particular, what they call it? But particular song track they have. I think it's pretty much the same beat, just different composers, classical music on top of it. So I think if someone that has the right ear and ability to mesh each contemporary classical music composer's best parts of their music onto a pretty good hip hop beat, I think this would be able to sell. And there's two good things about it. One is you're promoting the current contemporary classical composers' material, first of all. And second of all, you're introducing their music and classical music in general to a wider audience, not just a very small, niche of people, that just only know or that are into classical music. You would reach out to audiences like myself, where I'm just really more of a casual listener. But if you could get their new material, the contemporary classical music composers' material, onto something like this, I would definitely listen and then be more interested. And then from there, I would follow up. I think that's a pretty way to go. Now, when I read this, trying to how this came out and so forth, I know there are a lot of classical music diehards, I guess, that kind of despise this or think of it as a money grab. From what I read, if it's just a money grab, they did a fantastic job, because this thing was so popular back then. Even today, if you go to like a record shop, the used records, you may see this album, on vinyl being sold. I mean, I see this quite a bit. So I know back then it's pretty popular. Even heck, I even like it. I even got a couple more. I got their volume 2 and volume 3. So you know, just to throw it off. But anyway, what I'm getting at is, hey, can we do something similar to Hooked on Classics with the new modern contemporary classical composers music? If we can, I think it's just do it and then give it a shot. Let's see what happens. Maybe I'll get into more of the newer composers' music as well as get into classical music more. Suppose that. And I'm pretty sure other people would do the same thing. Let me know what you think. All right, thanks a lot. Bye.